Hello and welcome, and hopefully we are all ready to get started here today. I am Sara Davila, and I can see that people are starting to come through in our chat today. If you have not already found it, do take a moment to find that chat pod or that chat area. This is where you will have an opportunity to interact with me today and also with others on the call. If you can type in your name and where you're calling in from, like I see Paula calling in from Brazil. Hi, Paula. Nice to have you on the call. Thanks for joining us. Who else is on our call today? I love to say hi. I see John Paul. John Paul says hello. Where are you calling in from, John Paul? Feel free to leave a quick message with your name and where you're calling in from today. I always like to see that information. For those of you who are just joining us, my name is Sara Davila. I work with Pearson specifically on research facing the global scale of English. And today I'm going to share with you some of the information and resources I have with the GSE. So as you're coming in, I think we're good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and move on here. Assuming like, all right, there comes some messages. Let's see. Ooh, this doesn't move down automatically. There we go. All right. All right. Hello, Alvaro. Hello, Carmen. Nice to see you there. I see more names coming up as people are coming in. It's great to see everyone who's coming in on that call. All right. There we go. I see. Okay, there we go. We've got Pakistan. I see Ohio, Dubai, William calling in, Anne-Marie. We've got Rome. Sophia from Bulgaria, Sylvia in Madrid. I see lots of Ecuadors, people calling in from the Ukraine and the Philippines. It looks like we are having a global party here. If you are having any trouble with your technology or your sound, feel free to pop that into the chat box, and we'll be sure to take care of you. I see Octavio from Ecuador, Helena, Julia, Liana from Indonesia, Mexico, Colombia. It's fantastic to have you all here today, joining us for our Pearson English Spring event, our conference really for teachers online. I'm so happy to see all of you, and I look forward to engaging with you in this session. Very quickly, before we move on, we do have a few housekeeping notes for you. First of all, if you're curious, you will be getting certificates after this session. They should come sometime within the next 3 days to 2 weeks, but give us a little bit of time. As you may notice from the chat box here, there are quite a few of you on our call today, so we'll need a little bit of time to get those things together for you. Other things to look for when you're looking out for that certificate in your inbox, keep an eye out for your virtual goodie bag. Just like any other conference, we do have some really nice treats for our teachers, including some teacher resources, teachers' guides, and materials. So keep a lookout for those links and make sure that you get all of your great free stuff. And for those of you that are interested, if you can have a copy of this recording, there will be a live recording made available to you post this session. So if you'd like to share this session with your friends or family, or maybe you just want to watch this one more time, we'll make sure that that live recording comes out to you. So do keep an eye out for that. So in today's session, I just want to say, as I'm seeing all of these messages come in the chat box, take a look for names and for people who are teaching the same learner groups you're teaching, or for maybe other teachers in the same country that you live in, or maybe someone who's also teaching high school students, but instead of in Indonesia, they're teaching high school students in Turkey. As I go through my session today, I'll be sharing a few notes from my personal experience as an educator, and I love to hear your stories as well. I won't have time to read all of them, but I do encourage you, if I share a story that reminds you of something happening right now in your life or even in your own classroom, please feel free to take a few seconds, make a note of that in the chat. And as an educator, if you're keeping an eye on that chat and you see a story and you think, hey, that's just like my classroom, feel free to give a quick shout out. Say, Paula, I have the same problem. Or let them know, hey, this happens in my class too, and this is my situation. This is a great opportunity for all of us to come together, just as we would at a conference, to share our experiences, our ideas, and the situations that we're working through. And for you today, I'm going to share some information about the Global Scale of English, and specifically how to access our Global Scale of English, the GSE resources, and the Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit. I have a few tips and tricks for using the toolkit, so if you haven't seen that before, hopefully this will be very exciting for you today. All right, I already see Munjat in there is asking what is the toolkit. So if you don't know, an answer to that question is absolutely coming up. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. The first thing I think that we all have to acknowledge is that our world is radically changing right before our eyes. And in reality, whether or not you had intended to, we have all been pushed off of the board into the deep end of the swimming pool of online and distance learning. So if you're feeling like suddenly you have just been completely immersed in an entirely new world, you are probably not alone. Many of us are really swimming in this, and we're trying to figure out what are the best ways to work with our students, but specifically, what are the best ways to work with our English language learners when we're working with online communication and supporting communication development in a digital environment. So, with that in mind, we have a few things that we can know. The good news is we actually do have a lot of research on what good education looks like in an online environment. But before I show you this, I just want you all to keep one thing in mind. While I can show you the best practices for online teaching and learning and give you as many tips and tricks as I can for great interaction and interactivity in a blended environment, the reality is our situation right now is not ideal for online distance learning. In fact, what we're doing is emergency distance learning. And that is a whole new type of teaching and something that we as teachers should take a moment. I want you to take a deep breath. Think about all of the time and effort and work you have spent putting together webinars, getting together activities, getting things to engage and interest your students, and the struggles that you have had. And know that everything that you are doing is absolutely the best thing that you possibly can be doing, because we are in new times, and right now we're working with new challenges. So while we do have some great best practices from the research and from what we know works with our students, we also know that right now some of these best practices, they may just not be able to be actualized because our world has changed so quickly. However, we have been looking at online teaching and learning for a very long time. In fact, some of us have been working with online education as early as 1997. So we have a good 20 years of research on what it looks like to teach students using different types of technology. Some of you may be familiar with this research as it falls under what's called CALL, or Computer Assisted Language Learning. You can also look for research on MAL, or Mobile Assisted Language Learning. And then we also have another term that you'll see a lot today, which is very useful if you're looking for research, ITC, or Information and Communication Technology. These are three areas of research that we have really been looking into to understand what works well in online, distance, and blended learning for English language learners. And from this research, we do have a couple of quick tips and tricks that I am going to share with you today. And here are those tips in case you're interested about this. 20 years of research, I saw that from Etsy. I know it's amazing how much research we've done here. So a couple of things. One, use different technologies for different things. I think at this point, if you did not know how to do an online webinar, or if you've never led an online class before, as of today, probably all of you at some point have interacted with a Zoom or a Google Meet or a Skype call, WebEx, GoToWebinar, the meeting service we're using right now. There are hundreds of them, and all of them are good for different purposes. So do keep that in mind. Explore the technology that you're working with and make sure that the technology you're working with is fit to that purpose. So for example, today, right now, this teleconference platform we're using, fantastic for doing presentations. And some of these platforms have breakout rooms, they have lobbies, a chat pod like the one I have right now where you can interact with each other. Online office suites are also fantastic technology tools. They offer online real-time collaboration. Some of you, feel free, I see people dropping things in the chat. So what are some of your favorite online interactive collaboration tools? And I think things like Google Docs, where I can have two students in the same document at the same time, not only writing, but also chatting in the sidebar. So you can get that interactive communication and do your writing organization at the same time. Very easy to do in something like a shared document file, very challenging to do on a webinar presentation platform like this. So make sure you're using the right technology for the right tools and the right technology to teach the right skills. One size absolutely does not fit all. when it comes to the kind of technology you're using with your students. Tip number 2, collaboration isn't dead. Think about this. We have spent a good 30 years in the English language teaching industry focusing on making sure our students are working together, getting your students into pairs, getting your students into groups. I want you to take a moment and ask, how much group work and how much pair work have you assigned since the beginning of our new learning situation? If you haven't been doing a lot of it, now is the time to think, how can I add in online interaction, online collaboration, and online group work for my students? Because that interactive communication and collaboration, still best practice for making sure our students are engaging in language and using communication in a way that will allow for that deep internalization. So for example, right now we're working on some speaking and listening skills, but we've also got some reading and writing skills going on in the chat here, so we can absolutely develop our communicative skills using our interactive tools. My final piece of information, make sure that you're giving students feedback, especially right now in online interaction. I was actually on a call earlier last week with someone in Guatemala. So everyone in Guatemala, represent down there. I had a conference earlier in March, actually, in Guatemala. I really enjoy working with the teachers there. And we were talking about one of the challenges they were having inside of the university, that the students seem to have regressed in the language that they were producing with online communication. Rather than demonstrating the depth of knowledge that they had, showing how rich they are in their writing ability or even their speaking ability, the students were suddenly just really limiting themselves to the most basic kind of communication and interaction. So now is really a time to make sure that we're giving students good feedback on their online communication and supporting that feedback as much as possible with learning objectives. And that's really why we're all here today, to take a look at some learning objectives that we can use to support that communication both online right now in an environment like this, or once we get back to school and have our students in our classrooms in front of us, understanding what kind of objectives we can use to support their learning in that face-to-face environment. All right, so how can we do this then? If we need to continue creating progress, we want to make sure our students are still learning English. What are the best practices to make sure that we can achieve this? And how can we leverage our learning objectives to do this? Now, I have a feeling most of the teachers on the call here are like me. You have probably sat down at some point last year, earlier this year. You planned out a full curriculum. You knew what all of your learning objectives were, and you were 100% ready for your year. But then all of a sudden, maybe it's just me, does anyone else on the call feel like you took all of the work that you did to prepare for this year of teaching and just threw it into a black hole? I'm going to take a look into the chat bot here. Anyone else? I see Yana Pinto says yes. Olga just put a plus mark. There's so much communication in just that plus mark, Olga. I feel you. Marianne is there. So it's like I had to start planning all over again. Eshan says yes, absolutely. I see Gabriella Sencha over there says yes. All right, so it's not just me. It looks like a couple hundred of us absolutely feel like we took all of the work we did at the beginning of the year and just dumped it. I want you to take a moment and realize that all of that work can be utilized. What we need to think about is how we can get it online and still build that communication. So hopefully I'll be able to share, using our tools and resources, some ways that we can support that. And we're going to do that with the global scale of English. So very quickly in the chat, has anyone ever seen me talk about the global scale of English or the GSE live? Anyone see me in person there? Feel free to let me know. And if you have, where did you see me? We always love to find out. I want to know because I can't go to you right now. So I'm kind of curious who is on. I see lots of no's. I saw a couple of yeses in there. So a little bit of interest. Hopefully all of you have heard about the global scale of English. If not, let me give you the quick tour. You can see on the screen that we have the CEFR and we have the GSE. The CEFR, of course, is the Common European Framework of Reference. I think most of us are familiar with the CEFR scale, which includes that letter system that goes from the A's, which cover mostly our beginners to high beginners, into the B's, where our students begin to progress into pre-intermediate, intermediate, and even a little advanced learning, and then finally into the C's, where our students are now advanced and achieving their real goal of near native-like fluency. Now, if you're familiar with the Common European Framework of Reference, or the CEFR, the Global Scale of English will hopefully be a very useful resource for you. Our goal with the GSE is to really help add granular insight into the CEFR. And as we began to do some of this research to understand how can we really improve on the usefulness of the CEFR, we learned a couple of interesting things. In fact, you can see this inside of the ruler that I have on the screen. Take a moment and take a look at this ruler. Look at the CEFR and look at the GSE. I have some brackets here on the screen. What can you see? What are the big differences here between those lower A levels and these B levels? Can anyone point that out to me? What is the difference between those lower A's and those B levels? Claudia says there's some finer grading in there. Ken says it's the range. I see, and my Russian's not very good, but I say someone said time. There's kind of a gap. A B is bigger, or B is that wider level is what I'm seeing. Julio says B really has a very large level. And if what you're seeing as you look at the ruler is down here, these lower A's, kind of a small range. Up here, these B's, it starts to get bigger. And as a few of us have said on the call already, what you're seeing there is time. As we began to do the research and look at what the Global Scale of English could do, the GSE helps us really break into the CEFR so we can target learning at a more granular level. So that if I have a class where I know my students are A2, I'm not doing that strange language dance that teachers sometimes do where we have a conversation and we say that, well, yes, my students are A2, but some of my students are a low A2, and some of my students are a mid A2, and some of my students are a high A2. While A2 gives us a general sense of the types of skills our learners might do, we still kind of push our students into ranges inside of A2. What the GSE allows me to do is define that. So I can say some of my students are around a 30, many of my students might be in the middle around a 35, and a few of my students might be ready to transition out closer to a 37 or a 40. But as I looked at the ruler, I realized this also tells us a lot about the time it takes to learn. As you can see in these lower A levels, there's actually a little bit less to learn, and it's faster. You can learn this much more quickly. So you can blow through those A levels, the lower A levels, in much less time than it takes to get through A2 plus, B1, and B2. So for any of you who've been teaching for a while and you feel like sometimes your students just get stuck, it's not just you, it's the CEFR, it's huge. So this is where having the GSE can really help you break through plateaus that your students are experiencing by targeting learning objectives to push them. And this is extremely important right now. If you think about what's happening with your students in that interaction online, where previously your students may have been writing short paragraphs. Perhaps you were working on 3-paragraph essays or 5-paragraph essays. In class, your students could have academic discussions for 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Suddenly, you're online, and what you see your students is 1 sentence, maybe 3 words. Perhaps they're only communicating right now in emojis. Now, if you as a teacher have been working very hard to help your students develop their language skills, suddenly seeing this lack of progress, this regression, going backwards, that's a huge challenge. So while we're working through this emergency learning situation, utilizing online teaching and distance learning practices, we can also use the GSE to keep our students from either moving backwards in their language learning or from just plateauing right here and not making any progress forward. And this is where we're going to use learning objectives to help push our students to the next level. And I see some agrees. Anyone else feeling that with their students, that their online communication is almost slipping backwards instead of going forwards? And I'll take a look in here to the chat box. I see Frida says yes. Indeed, Christina says yes. Sadly, I see a couple of yes, sadlys. A few sometimes. We have a few teachers say they're having the opposite experience, which is fantastic. If your students are actually really continuing going forward, even better. But for those of you right now who are really struggling to get your students to give you a little bit more, hopefully you'll find some usefulness in our next section here. So how do we do then this teaching and learning with progress, and how can we use the Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit to help us with this? So now that we understand that time is really one of our biggest challenges that we have with our students, we can take a look at using our toolkit like so. Now, utilizing what we know, what did you know about your students when you shifted online? What was a general sense of what their current ability is? Or perhaps you have from your grade books, from your assessments, from your placement instruments that you may have used at the beginning of the year, you have a very good idea of where your students perform against the CEFR or the scale that you're using inside of your institution. Utilizing that information, what I do recommend doing is thinking about zone of proximal development, for those of you who are familiar with this, or I+1, that input plus challenge to make sure that our students are being pushed to make progress. We can create a bit of a range of learning. And when we're creating that range of learning, we want to keep in mind scaffolding, learning, and stretch. Scaffolding means we start a little bit below where our students are to make sure we have all of the skills we need for the learning. The learning should cover where my student is at and just a bit above. That's all inside of our learning zone. And then anything that's really far away from our learning zone. So in this graphic I have on the screen, my student is right now at a 31, but I have this range extending into the high 37s here. So that high end 35 to 37, that's a bit of a push. That's a stretch. It's further away from where my students are right now at that 31 in the GSE. So we can use this as a general rule to help us plan with the learning objectives. Remember, if you do know where your students are at, so for example, we know exactly that they are at an A2, you should be looking for objectives at A2, a little bit of A1, and a little bit of A2+. That way you can account for scaffolding, the learning zone, and also that stretch range. So now that we have a bit of a sense of how we can target that learning, let's take a look at where we can get those learning objectives. So on the screen right now, I have an image of the Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit, but we're actually going to jump over to the website so that we can all see how to do this online. So really quickly, I'm going to pop quiz in my chat for my international audience today. Does anyone know the link to the website for the Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit? Please feel free to toss that in there. And while we're doing that, someone said, could you clarify scaffolding? I will very quickly. Scaffolding inside of the English language classroom is very much like giving that extra support to our students. I like to describe it as essentially kind of teaching our students how to ride a bike. When your child is learning how to ride a bike at first, you probably have some training wheels that holds your student up, allows you to do the thing you need to do, but without falling down. That's a great example of scaffolding. So in English language teaching, this may mean if I'm teaching a more complex grammar for the first time, like say present progressive, I need to be sure my students know basic present tense in order to add that new form. So perhaps I start my lesson reviewing something my students already know, and then adding the new thing my students need to learn. That's a really easy way to support that scaffolding. All right, so a couple of people have guessed here. I see English.com starting to pop up in the chat box at just the right time from Ken Lendo, Marlena. I see Marlena in there as well. Great. So if you haven't found it yet, the best way to access the Teacher Toolkit is English.com. And if you'd like to go direct to the resources I'm about to show you to, we're going to English.com/GSE. And I'm going to start sharing my screen. During my screen share time, I won't have as much access to the chat. So do feel free to keep supporting each other, and I'll check back in with you in just a second. Now, this is my website, English.com/GSE. A few of you have the Pearson.com/English. That will also work, but the fastest and easiest thing to remember is English.com/G for global, S for scale, and E for English. If you have not been to the website before, I'll give you a very quick tour. There's a great deal of information on the Global Scale of English website. One thing I love to point out first right here is this Research and Expertise tab. If you are curious about the learning hours after hearing me talk about time, and you're asking, Sara, I want to know more. What is the actual time? Well, I have a resource. In the Research and Expertise section of the Global Scale of English website, you can find right here our insights from research on language learning, or what I like to very quickly summarize is, how long does it take to learn a language? If you're curious about the amount of time it takes to learn English and you'd like to learn more about that research, I recommend downloading that paper, How Long Does It Take to Learn in English? And this will help you understand how long it takes to go from A1 to C2 in the Common European Framework of Reference, utilizing the Global Scale of English to understand that journey. If you'd like to know more about the alignment between the Global Scale of English and the Common European Framework of Reference, we also have a paper on developing the GSE that I strongly encourage everyone to read. You can also see we have more reports here, so if you see something online that is of interest, again, english.com/GSE is the best place to go. The next link I'd like you to take a look for is this one, the Teacher Toolkit. The Teacher Toolkit is where you can actually jump in to the Global Scale of English and start pulling up learning objectives that you can use inside of your classroom. So I'm going to hit this big blue Access the Toolkit button. You'll see we go straight into the Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit. There is no sign on screen, and there is not anything that you need to fill out in order to go to the GSE Toolkit website. And of course, because we are live, the website is suddenly going to not work. But that's okay, because we always have a backup plan in Sara's land. So hopefully, and really quickly, if you need to come on audio to give me a prompt here, let me know if we can see this video moving on the screen. All right, since no one is yelling at me, I'm assuming the video is going, but if we can't see the video, just let me know. So unfortunately, because there are over 1,000 of you on our call today, I have a feeling everyone rushed over to the English.com website and I broke the toolkit, so that's my fault. So if you can't get into it right now, give it a few minutes and try again. It's probably because of Sara talking to us that it's a little bit challenging. However, just for you, I did go ahead and put together something for us. Now, when you go into the Teacher Toolkit, one of the first things that you're going to need to do is to choose your learner. You can do this on the Teacher Toolkit website by clicking that button that says Choose Learner. We have, in fact, when we did this research, we began to organize it in different stages. At first, we started with adult learners. The adult learner is the closest to the Common European Framework of Reference initial research group. So we began where the CEFR began, and we looked at general English for adult learners. However, once we had really started to have a robust set of learning objectives for our general adult learners, we realized that there are other types of English that we should really address. And from there, we began to research what English for professional learners, or ESP, looks like. After that, we began to expand our academic English learning set. And then, of course, for those of you who are working in young learning environments, we also have our young learner GSE objectives. So depending on the type of learner that you're working with, you can pin that into the Teacher Toolkit. The next thing that you can see that we have here is the language skills. I've selected young learner. So in young learner, the language skills that we can see are listening, reading, speaking, and writing. And the way that you can select these is you simply click on that button. You can do combinations. So if you're working on a speaking and listening class and you'd like to look at both speaking and listening, you can select both. If you're really focused, perhaps you're working with some of your high school or your middle school students and you are laser focused on teaching reading, in that case, you can really just select the reading box and you'll only see those reading objectives. So it's really up to you what kind of objectives you look for and how you search for them. I do want to point out, when you pin your objectives, you'll see a little gray box like the one that we have here. What you've done is added a filter. And these filters help you quickly go through our database of over 2,000 learning objectives that have been leveled against the Common European Framework of Reference with our research project utilizing over 6,000 experts from the field who have volunteered to help us level and rate these learning objectives. So these filters really help you search through that very quickly and find what you're looking for. After I select my filters, I can also then change the ranges on my toolkit. So if I'm planning for that zone of proximal development, and I know that my students are in that A2 range, I can target that as my zone of learning inside of my toolkit. I can make this bigger, I can make this smaller. If I don't get enough learning objectives, I can increase my range whenever I need to. This really just depends on what you're planning for, as you can use that rangefinder to help. And when you are finished, then you're going to click Show Results. I'm going to say right now, I'm going to pause my little video right there. That's the most important part. Do make sure that you show those results, because if you do not click that button and you send me an email, it's the first question I'm going to ask you. Did you show results? Because chances are, if you miss that button, you're not getting any results. When you do click, you'll see that this pulls up a huge list of learning objectives. You'll note that the skill is selected here, that speaking skill. I applied the filter for speaking. I'm seeing speaking objectives. You can also see the GSE range of these scores, and you will always see where that falls in the CEFR and the full range of that alignment for the GSE. So A1 in the CEFR covers 22 to 29 in the global scale of English. And perhaps you're reading some of these objectives now. You can see, for example, an A1 skill for my young learner, expressing likes and dislikes in relation to familiar topics in a basic way. Or perhaps my students are giving location of an object in a basic way. So these learning objectives help me understand the skills that either my students can do now, or the skills that I want my students to be able to do. So these are the learning targets that we're working towards. All right, we're going to move on. As you can see, quite a comprehensive list. In fact, 115 learning objectives. We have set up the Teacher Toolkit so that you can actually download and select this. When you click that download button, that will actually allow you to select and check objectives. You'll see a little radio box that will pop up on the left side of your screen, and then you can actually collect objectives that you would like to download. A couple of very interesting notes. You can download your set as a PDF, but recently we actually updated the Teacher Toolkit. So if any of you online are fans of Excel sheets, feel free to drop that in the chat. If you love a good Excel file, I like Excel. It's my favorite. Any kind of spreadsheet program, Google Sheets, Excel sheets, you name it. I like a good spreadsheet program. So with this, you can now download as a PDF or as an Excel spreadsheet. So if you like to use that, do check out the Teacher Toolkit and check out that feature. Now, we've also done this in a way that you can actually select everything. If you want all 115 objectives, you can do that. And keep in mind, when you do select large sets of objectives, not only can you download this, you'll see I'm doing this now as a PDF, and this will open up for us. So now I have a great little PDF file that I can print out at home or just put on my screen. And now I have the ability to start marking up these learning objectives, picking the objectives that will be the most useful for my students. And because I can collect this as a PDF, I have a record. I can share this with my administrator. I can share this with my teachers. I can even share this with the parents of the students I'm working with to help the parents understand this is where we need to go with our students, and this is how you can help your students during your online homework time with engaging with the classroom. So get these objectives, download those, print these out as a PDF, and share them. I love transparency in education, so I always encourage sharing your learning objectives with your students, because education shouldn't be a mystery. It should be a clearly defined journey, and we use our learning objectives to do that. Finally, when you select large volumes, if you have over 100 objectives for a specific skill and for a specific type of learner, it will actually give you some coursebook suggestions. So if you're curious, I get questions like this all the time. Sarah, here are the 100 skills. What books do you have? I'll be quite honest, I have no idea, but the Teacher Toolkit will be able to answer those questions. So that's just a new feature that we've added for any of you that are curious, and you might want to check that out. All right, and as you can see, 115. This is a lot of learning objectives. Even with the filters that I currently have, I might want to make this a bit of a smaller list. I can actually do that in a teacher toolkit using this filter right here, where I have the ability to add a word. And I'm going to be quite honest with you right now, Sarah is a little bit lazy. If you've met me in person, you've already heard this story. I won't even type in the full word because I know that the toolkit will work very well even if I just give it enough. So instead of typing all of describe, I just began to type describe. That was enough, and I decided to go ahead and search. So again, I'm a little lazy, but that's okay. It's a great trick. As soon as I searched those results, even though I only had a little bit of the word describe, look at that. The toolkit was absolutely able to find objectives with describing related to speaking inside of my GSE target range for my A1 to A2. So between my scaffolding, my learning, and my stretch, and focused specifically on the language skill I want my students to do, which is on describing. So now I can really quickly refine this. And again, if you want, you can select this list. If you want to select that short list of objectives, very easy to do so. And you'll be able to download those as a PDF as well. So this is a really quick way to start planning a class, planning a course, planning some homework, planning an online activity. Go into the toolkit, think about where my students are at, what their learning zone is going to look like, set your filters for your learner, the range that you want to work with, and if you need to, add an additional word filter so you can really focus in on a skill if you need to. And this will help you to find those objectives that you can then download as a PDF or as an Excel file so that you can begin to plan inside of your classrooms. All right, so that is the end of my little show. The last thing I say, I'm going to stop sharing, and hopefully you're all here with me. All right. So I don't know what happened to my webinar. There we go. Haha, I found it. Sarah is also learning new digital tools, so we're all in this together, if you're wondering. I'm also using something new for the first time. Everybody has been, so have I. So now, as you can see, I had to take that moment to find something very quickly. The last thing that I want to point out with our Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit, you'll notice on what we can see on the screen here that we have grammar as well as vocabulary. So I gave you the tour of just the first part of the toolkit, but you can also look up leveled grammar objectives that go from below A1 to C2, and you can search for specific grammatical forms. You also have the ability under the vocabulary tab to search for vocabulary words that have also been leveled to the Global Scale of English and the CEFR. For the grammar, if you're curious, we have leveled 365 grammatical structures to the Common European Framework of Reference and the Global Scale of English. And for vocabulary, we've leveled 30,000 lemmas or headwords to the GSE. And we also worked with 80,000 collocates. So it is a comprehensive vocabulary and collocates dictionary. And for those of you who are familiar, we did cover not only multiple levels of meanings of the words or polysemy, we also covered multi-word units. So we have words like light to describe light like the lamp in my room. We have words like light to describe she is a light personality. We also have light like light pollution and a light wave, those multi-word units that are extremely important inside of the science disciplines. So do go ahead, take a look at those vocabulary lists and those grammar lists. And I see some people talking about goodie bags. I'm going to toss out my final little goodie bag. You don't have to wait for your online goodie bag for us. If you head over to the Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit and you take a look at that grammar tab, you will find, if some of you have seen me in person, you know this, but for those of you who haven't, we have over 5,000 free grammar worksheets that have been leveled and aligned to the Global Scale of English that are all photocopyable, that can be downloaded as PDFs. So if you're looking for some extra homework opportunities, if you need something to just pass out to your students for the weekend because they're asking for anything to help them while they're at home, they just want to learn English, take a look at the grammar section of the Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit. Inside of the grammar section, again, you'll find those 5,000 worksheets. And those worksheets are aligned to our most popular grammar series. So do be sure to check. Some of our worksheets are American English grammar. Some of them are British English grammar. So be aware if you have a specific preference in your area, just to check the grammar and make sure that it's fit for purpose for you. All right, is everyone excited? We like grammar worksheets and vocabulary. I see thank you from Victoria. This webinar is so exciting. Thank you for telling me it's exciting. It's teacher's heaven, somebody said. I don't know who that was, but that's great. We're all very happy. Great, thank you so much. All right, so now we know about the toolkit. We know where to find some lessons. Would anyone like to see some examples of some lesson plans and activities that you can maybe do in your online class tomorrow or Monday? I see some yeses. Yes, yes, yes. All right. Since we want some lesson plans, let's take some look at some lesson plans. Now, I do like to say, Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit, it is a fantastic resource. I want you to use it for everything. When you're looking for learning objectives, go there. But keep in mind, the Global Scale of English will never replace a skillful teacher. So the GSE will give you a great deal of information on how you can help support your learners, but it does not replace the thinking work that we as teachers need to do. So we're going to be employed for a very long time as educators. We have a lot of work to do. And so for you as a skillful teacher, when you're looking at your learning objectives, there are some things that you need to keep in mind to help plan these effectively for your classrooms. The first thing is context. What is the context that you're teaching inside of? If you're in Indonesia, that will be very different from those in the Ukraine, from those in Turkey calling in today, from those in Guatemala or Ecuador. So what is the particular context in which you are teaching? I can't answer that question for you, and the GSE will have no way to know. So you'll have to think about that. You'll also need to think about how am I going to make this learning objective relevant to my learners. I'm going to ask you to give me 1 second. Just notice proper coughing technique there. Did need to clear my throat. I've been talking for a bit. So again, relevance. You'll need to figure out what is relevant for the students inside of your particular learning situation. For example, the Global Scale of English can tell you students can write a well-structured 3-paragraph essay. Why? What is relevant? Why is the student writing that essay? Global Scale of English has no idea. That will come from you as the educator. The same thing for the content, instruction time, instructional method. These are not questions that will be answered by the GSE. The one thing I will point out in time, remember that those A2 plus, B1, B2 level objectives, they're take more time to learn. That's why there are so many learning hours inside of those ranges. So when you are teaching the higher level skills, you do need to plan more instructional time. How much more instructional time? That's going to be up to you as the skillful teacher and how your students are responding to those objectives. So just keep that in mind. What the GSE absolutely does do for us, though, is it tells us about the skills, specifically the communicative skills of speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And then, of course, we have those sections for the enabling skills of grammar and the enabling skill of vocabulary. We also know the GSE value, those 30s, 40s, 45s, 46, that gives us the relative difficulty in relationship to our current learner. And this is what's going to help me plan for that I+1 progress that we want to make. So what are some activities and what do these look like for you? In the last few minutes today, I'm just going to go through these very quickly. Again, we're going to send you the recording as well as the presentation you're viewing today. So if you need a bit more time to sit down to read through these activities, we're absolutely going to make sure you have that in case this goes a little bit quickly. So my first activity to share with you today, this is for young learners, teachers online. Those of you working in that K to 6 space, kindergarten through 6th grade, or I would say 5 to around 12. I see some yeses here. Ola, Mehdi, Anna, Frida, lots of yeses. Belinda's in there with a yes. Irina says yes. All right, so we've got some young learner teachers on. If you're not a young learner teacher, don't worry, I'm coming for you in just a moment. For our young learners, here is a quick activity. I used the Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit to pull this learning objective: can post simple greetings or messages online using basic fixed expressions. So think about this. This is online interaction for a young learner. For those of you who are teaching those young learners, are they doing simple greetings and basic messages online? They can if they're at that A2 level of ability, so we can push them to do this. I, as the teacher in this particular situation, have set the context. Mine is going to be supporting each other because I feel like right now my students need a lot of support from each other. So that seemed like a very appropriate context. We're going to make the relevance here is about socializing with friends. So we need to support each other, and we can still socialize even though we're socializing from our homes. I want the content to be updates. Tell me about your life right now. That's very important. We're all a little bit isolated, so I want my youngest students to share their life with me and with each other. My instruction time, again, because this is an online class, I'm going to be a little bit flexible with that time. So here's my activity, very simple activity. I'm planning to do this through my class LMS or learning management system. For those of you who are using social media groups to manage your online classes right now, this can also work with your social media classes. Essentially, what I need my students to do is to take some pictures. You're telling me about your day now. Use your parents' phone, your tablet, your computer, go around the house, take a couple of pictures. If you are working in an environment where your students don't have a camera, or they have a camera but it's being used by 10 or 15 people, have your students draw pictures and put them together and just take one really quick picture. Your students don't have to do this as a photo activity if they don't have access to a camera. You can still have some drawing happen here. So that's an easy way to modify this. What I want my students to do is to share this in our classroom forum or our social media group. And when they do this sharing, I want them to use this share language. This becomes my model text here. I can send this out to my moms and dads at night to help them prepare their students or their grandparents, their caregiver, and that way they know what language they're going to help the children produce. This is very simple structures. This is my, so we're using some possessives here, and then I like it because, just a little bit of supportive reasoning, and that's it. Very light lesson, very easy to do. For the overall structure, what I want to do is first we'll have our pre-work, get the pictures, take the pictures, draw your pictures, and post. Then during the actual class session, I'll invite all of my students onto my Zoom call or into my WebEx room or into my Facebook Live, whatever I'm using, and I'll have 4 students at a time come off mute. So they can talk, maybe they'll even be talking over each other, but that's okay because it's just like a real classroom. They talk all over each other all the time. Doing it online, not going to bother your 7-year-olds at all. I promise you, they'll find it pretty funny. So bring those 4 students off, let them talk, let them share their pictures, encourage the use of that share language. If you're using something like a webinar platform, you can even take these sentences and post them online so the students can see them easily while they're speaking about their pictures. And while they're speaking, you can have students in the chat giving feedback, telling students, I like the pictures, encouraging their peers while they're doing that. So not only do you get the spoken communication, you can also have your students engage with that written interaction. And you see we have a couple of other tips here that you can use to support that. So that's a quick example of a young learner lesson. Any of you doing secondary education online today? That young learner lesson may be appropriate for secondary. You might level it up, maybe add some more complex. All right, I see Nozima, Adir, Arina, Tiana, Milena, Carmen, Takor, Mariah, Eddie. So many. All right, lots of people working with secondary here. Great. All right, so if you're doing some young adults, some secondary learners, you may find this a very interesting activity. Again, using online interaction. This is an A2 plus level skill, so a little bit more difficult than our previous example. Here, my students can make short descriptive online postings. So they're now making a post, more than just a sentence, an actual post about everyday matters, social activities, and feelings, using some simple details. And for this, I've decided the context for my secondary students Everyday heroes. I feel like that's pretty relevant in every single country right now. We have a lot of just everyday people going above and beyond to support each other, and absolutely heroes. Our medical professionals, even our janitorial staff that are keeping buildings clean, people who are going out and supporting electric work, your families and the parents that are going out to work in grocery stores, all of these things, they are all different types of heroes. Your students probably have some parents who are in fact everyday heroes. So this will be very nice, very relevant for those learners. For this, I did have this, fortunately, was a topic in my book, but it's also something I can get a lot of information from the general news. And for this, I'm thinking about a 1-hour class online, and then also a 1-hour class, or 1 hour roughly of homework that my students might do offline. Again, we'll use our class LMS to deliver this session. And this is, again, this is a very simple session, but this does require a bit more pre-work because these are secondary students. So I expect a little bit more of my middle school and high school students. I'm going to ask them to look at local news sites, either with their parents as support or work together, get online, collaborate, start a WhatsApp chat if you need to, whatever you need to do. Work with your friends or peers. You can do it together or work alone, but find some stories. If you want to tell a personal story, tell me your story. If you want to share a story from the news, find a link, toss those into our chat LMS or our group chats. And I'm going to ask my students, read the stories that your peers are posting. So now we have a lot of reading, we have a lot of research, and reading and communicating out, written interaction. So we're reading and responding. We're really building up our online interaction and communication skills. When we actually do have our class period, with my younger learners, I might take 4 students off mute because we're sharing very simple information. With these secondary students, I may only have 2 students talk at a time. And what I'll have them do is present information about the post. Why is this person a hero? Give us some examples of what resonated for this story for you. And here again, we have a bit more of a description of that learning session. So if you're curious of the details, what does this look like? Again, we'll send the slide deck after the session today, and you can read through these details in a little bit more depth. Now, unfortunately, we're running quickly out of time, so I prepared one more example of an activity for any of you who are working with adult students or specifically working with ESP. Really quickly, if you're working with professional English vocational, I see some yeses. Danita, Ken, Kismet, Azdir, Kejda, Maria, Glazada, Claudetta, Teresa, Joseph. Lots of people working with adults, a couple of people not. Adult people, I don't mean to abandon you. I promise you there's a really fun activity in here on doing some market research as a group collaborative activity. You can see my objective here is getting my students to post a comprehensible contribution in a discussion on a familiar topic, provided they have some time beforehand to fill in the gaps. So this is really pushing my students. As you can see, a B1 level skill. This is not emojis. This is actually posting comprehensive information and really digging into that writing. So we are going to send this out to you. If you'd like to see more about this activity, I apologize. It's just a timing piece. We ran a little bit out of time for this today. But again, we will be sharing this out with you. So do feel free to collect that and try it out. And I am going to say, if you're on our call today, if you came to us through our Facebook group, through LinkedIn, through Twitter, whatever social media you are following, if you use any of these activities in your classroom, please share your experiences with that in our social media. Tell us what worked well for you, what didn't work. And as you're utilizing the Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit and the online resources, if you make any special discoveries that you think are important, please feel free to share those across our different groups. I learn from your tips all the time. I've learned things about the toolkit that I didn't know about until I was presenting it for teachers. I had no idea. So if you have a good tip or trick you'd like to share, please feel free to do that. My final little gift to you today, I did go through before I started our session today and collect some resources that either I have written or my good friend and boss Mike Mayer has written. So if you've seen Mike Mayer, director of the Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit, you will find some really great resources in here that have been authored both by Mike and myself, and also some of our other Pearson collaborators who are on our call today helping out with our technical support and just moderating this huge chat. So we have more ways to use the Teacher Toolkit. If you're curious about how to use the GSE to help enhance learner engagement, a great little article there on that. How to do assessment for learning with the GSE in order to inform your teaching practices. Nice little article there. And a couple of tips here on helping to engage your students online and to balance your life in our emergency learning situation where we're doing that online and blended learning. And so from here, again, Teacher Toolkit, english.com/GSE. Do be sure to go in, use those different tools and resources. Don't forget, 5,000 free grammar worksheets buried in there, so you can bring those into your class too. And we do have, I wanted to leave just a minute. We have just a few minutes for some questions. So did we have any, from those who are monitoring, were there any big questions? I'm going to pop into there. All right. So someone says for, let's see. When you're looking for, if you're looking for listening skills, yes, you can find listening skills in the Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit. For those listening skills, when you look on that, you're just looking at the same space that you would find speaking, reading, listening, and writing. You can absolutely select listening and hone in on that as a very specific skill. You can even search for different types of listening. So if you're looking for listening comprehension, listening in detail, listening for specific information, listening to paraphrase, listening to summarize, we have skills around that inside of the Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit. You can absolutely find those in the website there. All right, looking for any other quick questions over here? For timing and how long it does take to teach, honestly, when it comes to time, it's always going to be relative based on your location and where you're teaching. So just do keep that in mind if you're trying to understand the time it takes to learn, as that is really going to be very general. For online assessment, absolutely. The Teacher Toolkit will give you great learning objectives. And using the learning objectives, it's very easy to make an assessment. My general quick recommendation, again, this won't be a high scientific test like some of our really high stakes assessments, like, for example, the Pearson test of English or the Versant test, or even some of those other international tests you might know, like an IELTS or a TOEFL or a TOEIC. These are really high standards tests. You can make a very simple standard assessment in your classroom using the GSE Teacher Toolkit. My general rule for this is as follows. Take one learning objective, create 3 items or 3 little assessment tasks that will help demonstrate your student can do that objective. And then really what you're looking for is 2 out of 3. If your students can successfully answer or complete an activity aligned to a GSELO 3 times, they probably have a pretty good idea of how to do that skill. If they can answer it correctly 2 times, they've got a pretty solid progress there. They might need some more work. If they're only successfully answering it 1 time or 0 times, that tells me that we may have some learning to do here. Again, this is not a highly scientific assessment. It's just a quick way that we as teachers can use the Global Scale of English to make quick diagnostic assessments that we can use in our classroom. So if, for example, you know you're planning a class to make a short post in an online contribution, maybe you have a little multiple choice test where you select the best online post. If your students identify it 3 times, then they should be able to make online posts. Let's go ahead and do an activity on making posts online. So a very simple way to do an assessment to just kind of help understand where your students are at and what they're doing. All right, I am looking at our time, and unfortunately, we appear to be about out of it. So again, I want to thank everyone here. First, for this chat has been just absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for supporting me and for each other in our chat today. I hope you have made some new friends, gotten a chance to share some stories, and learn some great information here. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of this chat, because if you're not at the very bottom, you can't see it. Thank you, Kejda, Erica, Markel, Susanna, Eula, Russ, good to see you on here too. Do keep in mind, if you were here this week, we have another week of this coming up next week. Stay tuned to our different social media channels to find out the topics. This is our Teacher Toolkit session, but we also have very practical sessions for secondary, primary, and adult learners. Take a look at our Pearson website and we'll give you lots of information. Again, do remember this webinar is being recorded. You will receive your certificate in anywhere from 3 days to a couple of weeks. Bear in mind, there were a lot more of you today than I expected, so do give us a bit of time to put all of that together for you. And do be sure to pay attention for your goodie bag so you get that as well as a follow-up to this session and the recording for you. Again, I appreciate everyone being here today. I hope that this was extremely useful for you and gave you a kind of a nice Friday thinking to do, something you can plan in for your Monday or Tuesday online sessions, and hopefully giving you some hope that knowing you are not alone right now in this emergency online teaching situation. We are all here to support each other, and Pearson is absolutely here to support you as well. So thanks so much for coming and for attending the session today, and I look forward to seeing all of you online in the future and hopefully at a conference or in your institution very soon. And from here, I think I'm going to turn it over to Pearson Tech Support, and we're going to go ahead and take this offline.